goal really here is to share insights and value to organizations, to businesses, to people leaders working in those businesses around the importance of team engagement and communication that helps drive business performance. So whether whether you are a frontline leader, a manager, supervisor, or someone that manages a team, it's never been so crucial to have the fundamentals in terms of leadership communication, particularly during times of change. I just wonder, like, I think we've got a lot of people on the call. I think we've got 12 so far, and there'll be one or two more joining as well, I know. Just hands up, are anybody in this group, are any of you people leaders? Do you manage teams? Do you manage people? Just a hands up, show of hands. Okay. Okay, great. Okay. What I'm going to do is share a screen with you. We're talking about times of change, and I think that it's interesting to see that, as we know, the rate of change is happening so quickly at the moment between future of work, AI, and the geopolitical situation that's going on at the moment. And in actual fact, Deloitte have reported that 70% of organizations say that adapting to change is critical to survival. But in actual fact, only 30% of those organizations feel equipped to do so. And the reason I'm bringing this into the fore is because, you know, when we work with companies, we encounter a lot of organizations that are going through strategic initiatives and change management, whether that's investing in more people and development, new product innovation, you know, operational excellence. But when those changes aren't being properly communicated or cascaded down within the organization, that's where the problem occurs. And we have found that fundamentally through the mid-management area of an organization. So it can lead to disengagement, it can lead to confusion, misalignment. What happens then is there's a lack of trust, or trust starts to diminish, and eventually people start to leave. And that's why we're having this conversation. And I think it's a really, really important one. And in actual fact, over the last 6 months, we've been brought in to more and more organizations to support their frontline leaders with fundamental leadership communication skills. And I'll talk to you about that in another couple of minutes. And again, you know, Gartner report that if you consider how important effective communications can be, it can improve employee understanding and support, you know, and I think that that's why we're having this conversation at the moment. What I'd love to do is share with you the blueprint, if you like, that we work with organizations. And that consists of the 3 C's. The 3 C's being clarifying the strategy is the very first step. It's creating communications or if you like, translating that strategy into clear communications. And then it's about making that connection, okay? What I'd like to do for a second as well is just share with you for a quick 1 minute, is just to share with you and step back and tell you who I am and what I do. My own background, I've been working for myself for the last 23 years, specifically around brand strategy and marketing communications. But over the last 6 years or so, it's been very much geared towards strategy communications and working with organizations to help drive business performance. But my journey has shifted very much from an entrepreneurial driven journey to a purpose-led. And what I mean by that is a lot of the stuff that I do actually connects back to when I was in school, okay? And I think that you'll find, you know, when people find their purpose, it is connected back to earlier memories or drivers, if you like. And for me, I wasn't good in school. Academically, I wasn't great. And that led to a situation where I felt very disconnected and very devalued from the whole kind of environment, if you like. And the other key thing for me was I struggled at presenting. I absolutely hated presenting in front of people. And I remember that I had to recite a poem in front of a full hall. And I remember my dad telling me, look, if you're nervous, don't look at the audience, look at the very back of the wall and focus on that and you'll be grand. So I did that, stood on the stage, looked at the back of the wall and saw a massive crucifix of Jesus Christ and forgot every word from the poem and was ushered off the stage. So it's coming full circle for me, because what's happening is the work that we do now is about supporting leaders present better, be better communicators so that they can engage teams. And the flip side of that is that teams and people feel connected to the bigger picture. Like more often than not, what happens is a leader will go in and talk about the metrics, the daily metrics, but it's a case of how do we connect those daily metrics to the bigger picture? Like from a strategy perspective, where is that we want to go, and why is it so important that these daily metrics or initiatives that we're speaking about is connected to the bigger picture? So with that, we're going to start with the first C, which is clarifying. And really success starts with clarity. And that requires, and that can apply to anything from your vision, mission, site strategy, or any strategic initiative. And it really requires having the right people in the room. And sometimes it's not just the senior leadership team. It's also some other key stakeholders from within the organization that can feel that they're contributing, excuse me, that they can feel that they're aligned, so that they become the ambassadors, and there's better buy-in within the organization. And we know this is important because Harvard Business Review report that organizations with higher levels of employee alignment experience 50% higher productivity. Okay. With relation to the clarity and the alignment piece with your people, the more misalignment and disconnected people are within your organization, it doesn't just impact business performance, it actually impacts the brand, the business, the reputation. And there's a guy in the States called Marty Neumeyer, and he speaks about your brand is your reputation. It's a person's gut feeling about a product, service, or organization. And I love that because from an internal lens, if people are misaligned and if there isn't clarity, that's where trust diminishes. And that's where people start to feel a little bit disconnected and start to leave. But even from an external perspective, what does that look like? From an external perspective, it means that people or talent that are looking to join the organization are getting a kind of a negative vibe, if you like, in terms of other people working in the organization. And like, even in terms of when you look at the statistics, 84% of job seekers say reputation of a company as an employer is important when making a decision to apply. So if you think about it for a second, when you're going on holidays, what do? You go to TripAdvisor or some of these websites to check out what other people are saying. Candidates that are thinking of joining an organization do the exact same thing. They'll look on social media, they'll look for feedback, they'll look for comments. And again, if there is that misalignment and if there is that feeling of disconnected within the organization, that will filter through to that narrative that some of the talent will review and look at. And on the other side, in terms of partners and potential customers, they're also going to be looking at that. And again, 80% of senior execs use social media to support a purchasing decision. So it's all connected. What I'd like to do is, for maybe 2 or 3 minutes, I'm going to introduce Steve Harvey, right? And this is a chap who I've met recently enough. And I think we just clicked. And I think one of the reasons we clicked well was because if you looked at his LinkedIn profile, it says, my superpower is to shine a light on the potential on people within. And I love that. And I'd love Steve just to talk about some of the work he does with organizational change, strategic planning, but also his own insights in terms of what does that look like in terms of co-creating those strategic plans, and how do you get those right people in a room, and what does that look like? So I'm going to ask Steve to jump in and maybe talk for 2 or 3 minutes, Steve, if that's okay with you, and maybe share some of your own insights.
Yeah, thanks, Gary. Hello, everyone. I guess just to answer a previous question that came, I was a people manager for, I guess, over 20 years of my corporate life. But I've now set out and work on my own. So when he answered that question, Gary, I was a bit torn between, because now I work on my own and my best friend at work is the dog, and quite often miss that company. But it does put me in a place where I work with lots of other companies as part of my consulting, and always draw on those values and experiences that I got. I guess with my work, I'm working with companies quite often around leadership and strategy, vision. My background is in design, so I'm strong with design thinking. And through that process, it's very much about understanding user needs. And I find this can often be a gap when working on strategy. It quite often comes top down, and then a process of maybe sharing and communicating, as Gary mentions. A place where I drive from is common, I guess, but it's top down and bottom up. So Gary talks about getting the clarity around the communication. For me, it starts earlier. It starts actually involving people in that process. So if you're building a vision, if you're building aspirations, if you're building a strategy, then people across the company and teams need to be involved. And this needs to be done in a way that, and I've just come off a call actually working with a team exactly on this, where it's not set up in, if it's like an exam or you're trying to see what people in teams know about your existing capabilities and knowledge. It's very much opening and removing those fears and embracing people. So I would say getting the right mindset and getting the right conditions. Gary talked about trust. And doing that in a way that I'm currently working with a company where we are looking to try to get outputs from teams to input into a strategy and vision, but actually the bigger piece of it, the bigger piece rather than the output, is the journey that they're going through. Are the leaders actually turning up and listening? What's their intention when they engage with the teams? And are they focused to actually hear?
Can I ask you a question just on that? Just
Yeah.
something that's just struck me about that was the Jim Collins talks about getting the right people on the bus and in the right seat, wrong people off the bus. Like I'm sure that process then clearly indicates who your champions are through that process as well.
It is, but I think that comes a little bit further down the line. And the only reason why I say that is when you start any of these processes, it's your one opportunity to really listen to the people that maybe don't always get heard, who aren't the ones that are the champions in the room and speak up. And the reason I feel that that's important is because these are the details within the company that ultimately, as you say at the end, you know, are going to show up as your brand internally as well as externally.
Steve, whenever we work in these type of projects as well, what I find is that when you do that, it seems like that there's clearly more buy-in and drive, if you like, from those people to be able to cascade those messages to their teams then as well.
Yeah. Yes, and it's difficult. Well, I think we can make. I think we can make a lot of this engagement very difficult and very complicated in organizations, but I actually think the simpler we make it, and it actually needs to be quite simple. Mindset is obviously key to any form of change. If we're going to embrace change, that's change for everyone, not just, you know, the classic of I'm all about change as long as it's everyone else, you know. So if leaders are not able to show change in themselves, then how can you expect that from others? And that can be done simply like through engaging with teams as part of a process to, you know, if you're working on a strategy or a new department, maybe the goals you're looking at the next year, maybe you're trying to shape things up. Well, you know, they need to include them from the beginning. And one of the biggest challenges is that people believe that they need to go away, figure that out first in their head, so they have a framework, so then they can go and share it with their teams, you know, and it can all be done in a nice sort of space and safe, because that's how they'll feel comfortable. So I think Stephanie had a hand up there to comment.
Unmute myself. Thanks, Steve. Steve, you and Gary and I need to go and riff offline because we're so in the same space. You and I take a similar approach, and where I advise people to start, Stephen, is the messy beginning. So involve people before the I's are dotted, the T's are crossed, and you know all the answers, because you're going to build the trust, you build the relationships, and you get their input. And Gary and I both share a 3C framework. My 3Cs are slightly different, and I know that we're going to come on to that in a second. The 3Cs that I include are the culture, capacity, and capability of people. And that's what helps me help organizations to simplify how you can feel overwhelmed by all the things that you need to do to bring people on the journey with you when it comes to change and strategy development. It makes it more tangible. So I probably jumped ahead, Gary, to where you thought I'd be, but Stephen just teed me up so perfectly that I just thought it would be good to jump in. A messy beginning.
What I'm learning, like when you do insights with people, you identify whether they're blue, red, green, or yellow, and I'm a blue. Definitely, that's my predominant. So I've had this whole presentation structured to a T, and you've just totally destroyed the whole thing.
Excellent.
Thanks very much for that, Steve and Stephanie. So what I'll do is I'm going to carry on, and just give me a show of hands. Can you see the next screen, the create? Yeah, great. So that leads us to the next C. Okay, so we have the strategy. We're clear in terms of what that looks like, but then it's a case of how do we translate that into clear communications. And if it's not translated into simple, clear communications, that's where we have a situation with those Chinese whispers. Now, I'm using this image of a movie which is called Hear No Evil, See No Evil. I don't know, have you all seen that, or have people seen that movie before? No? Okay, for the ones that haven't seen this movie, it's an oldie, and it's a comedy of two characters, Gene Wilder and Richard Pryor. Gene Wilder is deaf and Richard Pryor is blind. And they get into all types of messiness and trouble, basically. So they're in a cop shop or a police station where the policeman is interviewing or asking Gene Wilder, who's deaf and can only read lips, a question. And he says, was there or wasn't there a woman on the scene? But Gene Wilder's interpretation was Fuzzy Wuzzy was a woman. So the reason I'm using that is because you can see clearly how miscommunication can easily happen. So if your strategy or whatever the strategic initiative is not translated to the audience specific to who you're communicating with, it's not going to land. There's going to be Chinese whispers, and there's going to be all types of different variations of what it is the organization is trying to do. And that's why creating the communications is so important. Okay, so in terms of creating those communications, we've lots of different tools to do that. The two that I'd like to speak to is a communications grid, and that's implemented within a framework of having a session with key stakeholders within the organization to start filtering through some of the key messaging communications. That leads to what we call as a leader cheat sheet. Ultimately, that's a one-pager that supports your frontline leaders, supervisors, and managers to be able to refer to this and think about it from a high-level perspective, what this strategy is all about. A great example is a recent project we've worked on for an organization who had a strategic initiative in terms of reducing waste on site. So it was to improve operational efficiency. So we linked that to the bigger picture in terms of what it meant to be more efficient. And what it meant for the organization was more work coming through the system, because within the network of businesses that they are within, if they weren't efficient, then the organization would look to other sites to send projects to. So in actual fact, the daily metrics that your manager or frontline leader is talking to is linking to the bigger picture in terms of, look, we need to do this together because ultimately we need to secure the future of our site. It's about securing our position for the future. And that's how we connect that piece together. So again, it's about igniting the spark. It's about making it as memorable and as sticky as possible. And in my own view, there's no reason why internal communications or messaging communications doesn't need to be like your consumer-facing brands like Nike or Apple, where you have a statement that you're hanging your hat off, whether it's just do it or think different or whatever, but you need something to kind of stabilize that whole messaging environment. And we do that through the grid that I'd mentioned before. It consists of three key components: your core positioning, which is your headline statement in terms of what you want this to be known for, whatever that initiative is. And then it's supported by a number of key pillars or message pillars, and that could be people development, improving operational excellence, whatever it is, depending on the business that you're in. And then it's about translating those pillars into targeted communications for people that are working maybe in different functions, in different business units, in different locations within your organization. That leads us to the third C, which is about making the connection with your people. And it's about, connecting or bridging the gap from, as Steve had mentioned, top down and bottom up. How do you connect that message to people working within your organization? This is again where I was going to introduce Stephanie, who's actually now completely destroyed my presentation. But maybe Stephanie, you'll talk a little bit about your 3 C's, because I think that's where your cue was originally supposed to be.
I don't stay in my lane. So as I was mentioning before, in terms of my 3 C's and following on from your communications grid, because I wasn't quite sure where this fit into your overall proposal. When you start to go through leading change, and when you go through any kind of change initiative, as both Stephen and Gary have been talking about, you need to get into the weeds in order to really connect with people and have them feel connected. Where I have used capacity, capability, and culture is to help give you that high level anchor while you're doing all of the 3 C's. So Gary, I think you and I are going to connect our C's and come up with a matrix.
Yeah.
You're using my 3 C's, the capacity, capability, and culture, to just keep your eye on the bigger temperature gauge. Are you, when you're communicating to people, are you showing how you're going to build the capacity for them so that you're giving them the extra space for asking them to do something different? What you don't want is to communicate a message that you're asking them to do something on the side of the desk on top of the day job, because then they're going to push back. The capability, what are you going to do to support the skills that they need? Do they already have the skills they need? Or are you going to give them a refresher? And are people feeling comfortable that they know how to do what they're being asked to do? So the communications, if the communications is about doing something different, well, that communications needs to include, well, how are you going to skill me up? And then the culture is the context that we're working in. As you're looking into your communications grid and your starting point, and going back to Stephen's point around your strategy, the first question you need to ask yourself when you're doing any kind of change initiative or leadership initiative, where is your culture at the moment? Is it at the point where it is ready and willing to accept and embrace what it is that you're rolling out? If you offer it, will it ignite that spark, or do you need to do some preliminary work to soften the ground and get into that space? And so often those are the 3 less tangible things, albeit capability is more tangible, that when we get into the detail of planning, we tend to forget some of those things. So I call them out so that it helps to keep those front of mind as you're going through a process.
Steve has a comment there, Steph. Capacity is interesting when people evaluate operational versus strategic commitment. Steve, do you want to just jump in and expand on that?
I just like the starting. I've not. It's the first time I've seen this, but it's I'd say nearly 9 times out of 10 when I'm working with people on strategy and strategic stuff, once they get their head into that space to work on it, is great, because it is a different hat from their day to day. And then you do all this work and great ideas, and then the operational hat comes back on, and people actually don't know how they're actually going to start working on some of these things, because most people are just maxed out on their day to day. And then that's where strategy comes in, because if it's a strategy, then you need to make time for that, because it's a strategy to put in place because this is how you think you're going to win, grow, beat competition, increase your opportunities, etc. Whereas some of your day-to-day operation stuff is going to keep you at the same place. However, it takes up your time. So that's the difference between just setting goals and having a strategy to enable you to win, because the strategy makes sense that you're going to stop some things or you're going to make some space for it. A list of goals that I want to achieve just becomes a list of goals. It's like a shopping list. It's like a Christmas list. You can put as many goals on as you want.
It reminds me of, as a solopreneur working for yourself, it's a case of, working on the business rather than in the business type of thing. And I know that I've just seen Pádraig Murphy, who's going to be talking here in a minute or two. He's a client of ours, but and Pádraig, amongst others, you'll find that it's trying to get that balance right between, doing the day job and doing the strategy stuff as well. And there seems to be that's a big challenge. I've come across that certainly. So what we'll do is, I'm just going to continue here for a second. I want to share a report which was released earlier this year about the future skills needed, particularly in the medtech sector. It was released by SkillNet earlier this year, and it highlights that soft skills are relevant all levels, or human skills, shall we say, at all levels across all functions. But in the report, I wanted to touch on 3 of those skills gaps, if you like, which was leadership, communication, and strategic thinking. And Stephanie had referenced the capability piece in terms of upskilling, and this is something that we're seeing more and more of now. It's people are so busy. How can we support frontline leaders and leaders within an organization to be able to deliver, present, and engage with teams? Because that middle management is so important, and this is where we provide some support for frontline leaders. But before I get into that, I'd love you to type into the chat, what do you think one of the top 3 reasons for that people leave an organization? So just for a couple of seconds, type into the chat as to what you think. Okay, so we've got poor managers, lack of clarity or direction, no opportunity to develop, no clear pathway, low morale, stressed and overloaded, no opportunity to progress, poor communication, bad management, not feeling valued. Great. Okay. Well, what we have found is that it's the manager's approach and leadership style is one of the top 3 reasons. And in actual fact, it's supported there by 50% of employees have left the job to get away from their managers. So it'll just show how important it is to resource and support frontline leaders to be able to deliver and engage with people and teams within the organization. As I said, we don't have time to go through all of the aspects of the leadership training piece, but there are 3 particular ones that I'd like to touch on for a second or two: presenting key messages, leadership presence, and active listening. Hands up who has come across this lady, Amy Cuddy. She's a social psychologist. Anybody seen her before? Okay, so for anybody that doesn't know Amy Cuddy, I'm happy to share any of the insights and links after the meeting. But Amy speaks about how important body language is when engaging with people. And in actual fact, she asked the question, how important is body language important? And the answer to that is yes, it is, because we don't communicate with words alone. If we are unsure about the words, we pay attention to what we hear and see. And this is where non-verbals come into play, like in terms of tone, body language. So if there's a mismatch between the words and tone or body language, that's where miscommunication can often appear. And there's a rule, Albert Morabian has a rule called the 70-38-55 rule. And he says that only 7% of communication is based on words. So when you look at this statistic, you'll note that there's a couple of bullet points between each of these. So in terms of words that we use, and when we're communicating and engaging with people, it's about being concise, it's about using simple words. Or when we look at body language, it's about eye contact, smiling. Even, smiling can sometimes be forgotten about, particularly on webinars like this. Or in terms of tone, it's about the variation. It's about being clear and sometimes just pausing, okay? I also would love to share with you this was something that struck me at an event earlier this year. And actually, Vivian Kiernan, who's on this, is part of the Irish Centre for Business Excellence. And Viv, I've used this because it struck me when Kay Shanahan, who's a director of Edwards Life Sciences, spoke at your event. And I know that you guys were releasing a report with the UL Chemie Business School and about the future skills needed for emerging leaders. But what struck me was that this lady was talking about being human and creating the connection. You know, and we can, as Steve had mentioned, you can complicate things, but it's about bringing it back and making it simple. And I think that there is real value in that. And some of the shared insights during that meeting was, it's about learning more about your people. It's about coming out from behind the screen and walking the floor. And it's about building trust. That's how we build trust with people. So at this point, what I'd love to do is introduce Pádraig Murphy, who works as a HR manager at Integer. Integer are a medical device manufacturing company. And we've worked together for the last number of years. And I guess just to tee this up with Pádraig, we had a conversation the other day. And what struck me was Pádraig's reference to where communications was when we started to work with relation to where it is now. I guess some of the challenges, the impact, and in actual fact, the catalyst for their project was they were Integer Galway were looking at doing a site strategy, part of which included looking at the engagement scores, and one of which communication came up as one that they needed to look at. And they've used that as part of a key pillar within the organization to improve communications, recognizing how important that is within their own organization. So Pádraig, I'll hand it over to you, just if you wouldn't mind, and looking forward to hearing your insights. Thank you.
No problem. Thanks, Gary. Hi, everyone. Yeah, as Gary said, Pádraig Murphy is my name. I'm HR manager here at our site in Parkmore in Galway. Integer is a contract manufacturer for medical devices. So we would supply to the big companies like Abbott, Stryker, Medtronic, Boston Scientific, and so on. We have a sister facility in New Ross. It's a larger facility of about 1,000, maybe 1,200 people. We've 350 approx here. And we've a recent acquisition in Spiddle in Galway with about 150. But to Gary's point, we roll out an engagement survey annually for our direct labour. That would be primarily our manufacturing staff. And the communication score has repeatedly come in low. And we were baffled by it to some degree as to, God above, we're always communicating, we're always cascading messages, we're always getting our supervisor to deliver updates and all of that. Why is the communication feedback so poor? So we decided to conduct some focus groups with regard to the engagement survey results. And basically, we got hammered over the communication, saying it's very poor, that if associates or employees raise issues, they never get feedback on what they raise. Nothing happens. We're supposed to have weekly meetings in our production areas. They don't happen. We are supposed to have quarterly or more frequent town hall meetings, which would be an all-employee meeting. They were ad hoc, and when they did happen, they were very business-centric, very data-heavy, and people just switched off. Supervisors then sort of felt that whilst they've been tasked with communicating with employees, they were never equipped to do so. They were basically giving a PowerPoint via email that says, here, please cascade this message. And they couldn't tie up the context sometimes in terms of the message with what they've been asked to deliver. So it was falling down, and we were just taking a very simple view. Well, we're communicating. What's the problem? So we did work with Gary, and we delved into some of the feedback and some of the environmental factors. And I mean, because of the nature of the products we make, some of them are metals and guide wires and so on, and our space is quite tight. There was actually no physical space to hold some of the meetings for our operators. And when they did have space, it was a noisy environment. So one of the first things we decided to do was build a room where we could bring our lines off the line, the production line, and have a stand-up communication meeting. That was a fundamental shift. The second part was we assumed all of our people managers and supervisors were equipped to convey the messages that we wanted to convey. They're not. So we made that mistake. We were having our supervisors making the assumption they could deliver key messages and key programs for us. They didn't feel comfortable doing it. So that's where we started. Somebody mentioned the messy beginning, Stephanie. I think I just wrote that down. Well, that's where we were. We sort of had to just go back to the starters. And so we did. We started working with our supervisory group, getting their feedback. And then we ran a communications workshop with Gary and a few others to equip and upskill our supervisors where they felt comfortable delivering messages. We then established a framework whereby we committed that we would have one weekly meeting with each production line in a stand-up room, fit for purpose, with appropriate presentation screens, and then that they'd have a certain number of items they would communicate on. And we were talking about items that would be relevant on a weekly basis, such as key weekly messages, key updates, how the team is performing, and if there's any recognition issues, be it somebody's birthday, somebody's work anniversary, or whatever it might be. And that began to go down very well, except, again, we just assumed we'll send out the PowerPoint and this will all be good. And eventually, not very quickly rather, the supervisors came back and said, the slides aren't working. They're too busy. And what was actually happening was you had a supervisor in the room, turning away, reading off the screen, and everyone else was bored. So it wasn't working. So what we've decided to do, and again, Gary helped us on this, we restricted it to 3 or 4 slides, 3 or 4 bullet points per slide, and then use the speaker notes as our vehicle to convey the key messages. And there's been a huge shift in getting across, because that comes back to the body language piece. You're now equipping your speaker to just, use the speaker notes, reference a few key bullet points that you have in your slides, and listen and get the feedback from your audience. It sounds basic, but we just missed it.
But and remember, Padraig, as well, one thing that I did take from all of that process was, and credit to you and to the rest of the PLT as well, that you gave this the time that it needed, but bringing those supervisors back in a room to get further feedback, to find out what was working or what was the feedback from their teams. And there was a big move or a shift then as well in terms of the weeklies, wasn't there?
Yeah, because we assumed they wanted a weekly update. They didn't. They said twice a month is fine. So we've agreed now we do a week 1 in a 4-week month update, which sort of looks back on the previous month, and a week 3 update, which gives you a sort of a status in terms of how we're doing and looking forward to the end and then into the next month, because we work on a monthly production cycle. But then that was us listening, which we never did before really, in terms of how we set ourselves up. The other key point was we committed then on a quarterly basis that our PLT, our management team, we would go and take one of the meetings once a quarter. We sort of doubled up. We take 2 members of the management team and we divvy it out between us. And the briefing at that stage once a quarter would be more higher level in terms of the business, where we're going, overall picture, key challenges, and so on that's coming down, as against from the day-to-day weekly type of interaction. That we've only had one of those. The second one is due now shortly. That was extremely well received, both by the audience and indeed the management team, some of who never did that in their career before. Because if you're working in a function like maybe finance or customer operations, you tend to be dealing with an external audience, not your people inside. But there was a disconnect there. So that really worked for us as well. And the third component then is we've committed to 2 town halls a year, but they're going to be very much higher level. And looking forward in terms of the strategy that Gary mentioned, and we're talking about new opportunities, the challenges we face. We've one scheduled now for a few weeks, and it will be very interesting in terms of the whole geopolitical space, because that's impacting us as it is many, many other companies. And we've sort of had a fairly flat few months now in terms of demand, and we're, the next 6 months are going to be challenging. But we're in a position where we have a forum where we can talk to that and talk to it at a high level. So we put that framework in place. We've equipped our supervisors and the key people who are delivering the messages, but we're also continuing to do a continuous feedback loop to assess how well or how not so good it's doing. Because again, in my experience, and I've seen it, and everyone on this call probably has seen it before, you launch something, but if you don't sustain it and continue to invest in it, it will fall flat on its face. And we've had struggles around that, but we're keeping driving it. And it is a key metric on our weekly management meeting. In fact, it's the second agenda item every week, the first one being safety. The second one is communications.
Brilliant.
So it's a work in progress. We still have a long way to go, but I think the feedback we're getting is very much more positive than where we were 12, 18 months ago. And it has given us a different sense of getting to know our people, knowing what's going on, and demystifying maybe and the rumor mill that every company will have. And if you don't fill that gap with actually real information, that will continue. So yeah, we're delighted with it. Again, a long way to go.
Yeah.
And if anybody wants to chat offline, I'm glad to make time, and I'll give you a further update on it. So
thanks, Pádraig. Look, I promised we'd finish by 1:45. We've 2 minutes left. I have a few more slides left. I'm not actually going to go through them. What I'd prefer to do is, if anybody would like to ask Pádraig a question there, or even just open this up for maybe a minute or two, and we'll close out the meeting then, rather than, I'm happy to share these slides afterwards with all of the participants anyway, but I think that there's real value here. So, and Pádraig, I know you're really busy, so thank you so much for taking the time to share your insights. Really, really appreciate that. Thank you. So look, I'm going to open it up. Anybody have a question for Pádraig or anybody on the panel today?
Pádraig, I'll just jump in and say, your story is just so encouraging. Having been in your shoes so many times and been an HR leader in manufacturing sites, getting communications right is really, really hard. And the rumor mill is such an embedded part of the culture. So the fact that you guys have taken all of those steps and the Neptune, 3 C's to heart, and you've made those kinds of changes in 18 months is just fantastic, and fair play to you.
Okay, thanks, definitely. But it's a work in progress. It never stops.
Okay, I'm going to close it, guys, if there's no other questions. Again, I just want to summarize in terms of the purpose of this meeting or this webinar was to create more awareness of the 3 C's, and I guess having Pádraig and Stephen and Stephanie to speak to some of those points, I think has added huge value. And I thank you guys for being willing and brave to do that. I know it's not easy all of the time to do that, so thank you. And really, again, it's about making sure that we empower our people leaders to improve engagement and drive performance within business. And there is definitely a fundamental shift. I've definitely seen over the last year, particularly, an increase in organizations and businesses. And this applies, by the way, to small businesses right up to the larger enterprise businesses as well. But there seems to be more of an investment in supporting people leaders and frontline leaders within organizations, which is really fantastic to see.